G'day and welcome to my series where I take open source software and install it on cheap, inexpensive hardware, which then offers an alternative to the mainstream products like the Microsoft servers and the like, to give small business, particularly small business that in the current environment is cash strapped, the ability to still have all the function they'd need from a server to run their business, but without having to pay the huge licensing fees or spend huge amounts of money on servers that can run. Today we're going to look at Nginx Proxy Manager, running that up on our ProxMOX cluster. So Nginx Proxy Manager is a reverse proxy server. Why do you need a reverse proxy server? Well, most businesses, small businesses, will have an internet connection via their ISP, and from there they will have some sort of router that allows the computers inside of the organization to go outbound and get to the internet. However, because you've just got the one IP address, if you want to publish multiple services to the public or to the internet to then be accessed maybe by your staff at home or by your clients, having one IP address is difficult because it means you can really only have one service published at any given time. There's ways around it, but generally in this day and age, that's the general rule. So what can you do? Well, you can purchase from your ISP more than one IP address, and then with your router you can then give it a rule to say if it's this IP address the request comes on, talk to this web server. If it's that IP address, then talk to that web server. But then IP addresses these days are hard to come by. It adds additional cost to your ISP, and generally there's probably not much of a need for the IP address given the extra cost that you can't achieve by other methods. One of those methods is the reverse proxy. So the way it works is this. In the world of ProxMOX, you probably have multiple containers, multiple virtual machines. You may have a container that handles your website. You might have another container that handles your email, your mail server. Then you might have another one that is your file server, or might run Nextcloud, which is very popular with file servers. So all three of them are servers, and you've got the single IP address coming in to your organization. So the reverse proxy sits just past your router, and it then the router basically forwards port 80 and port 443 to your reverse proxy. And the way it works is a client will do a request. So you publish on your public DNS server some names. You might have mail.yourdomain-name. You might have www.yourdomain-name. So your client might request www.yourdomain-name. That passes through the internet to your public IP, to your router, then to your reverse proxy. Your reverse proxy then goes, okay, well, if you're requesting www, then you want to go to this web server here. So it then passes that request on. If it's mail, for example, it's webmail you're wanting to give to your staff, it would then go, right, there's a rule here for mail, I will now pass that through to the web server. So a single IP from your ISP points to your reverse proxy, and then the magic occurs here. So that's basically how reverse proxies work. And the Nginx Proxy Manager is a very easy to use product that ties a lot of tech together that allows to, at a very high level, to then configure these rules very quickly. The problem with the product is it runs under Docker, which is associated more with Red Hat and Fedora, and there's tons of support out there for that. ProxMOX, on the other hand, it uses Debian and it uses LXC Linux containers to create its containers. So Fedora uses Docker to create its containers, and ProxMOX uses Debian and LXC. So there isn't really an easy way to do the mainstream install of Nginx Proxy Manager until this guy here, and here's the website to get to it. This guy here created a very nice installation script and a very easy way to install this onto a ProxMOX LXC container. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through how you'd set this up, and then I'll run through creating a few rules so that we can then experiment. So first things first, you've got a couple of ways to install this. The first way is to run this on one of your nodes in your ProxMOX cluster. This is supposed to do all the dirty work. I actually find it was a bit cumbersome. It failed out for me, and yeah, so instead of trying to show you this, I'd prefer to show you the alternate usage, which is a lot easier to use in the end, to be honest, and it achieves the same result, if not a better result, in my own opinion. Okay, so first things first, you'll see here it says it only works with Alpine, Linux, Debian, or Ubuntu. Now, ProxMOX uses Debian, so why not deviate? May as well just keep the same Debian type setup. It's just better for compatibility, in my humble opinion. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that we download the Debian template, the standard template, to our ProxMOX node. To get that, you click Templates, of course, and you pick Debian to install. Now, there are two versions of Debian available, Debian 10 and Debian 11. I found that 10 is more stable at this precise point in time. So I've been using Debian 10 when building my containers. So what you need to do is you need to create a container. You need to give it a name. Now what I've done in my router is I've created a host name to an IP address with the same name, reverse. I'm going to give my container a root password. I'm going to select the Debian 10 standard installation. Now, if you go back to this guy's script, you can see here it's a 2 GB disk, 512 megabytes of memory, and 1 core of CPU. So it's very lightweight, which is great. And that's the benefit of using a container over a fully fledged virtual machine, where you have a hardware layer, a kernel operating system layer, all the drivers then to support the hardware, and then the software running on top of that. This is pretty well matched, just running the the software you need in a very thin layer on top of the ProxMOX's core operating system. So it's very, very efficient, and you'll see that. So memory 512 meg, 1 CPU. At this point, you've now got to define an IP address on your router's subnet. I'm going to pick this one. You may have a different router to me, so you might have different IP address here. For the sake of this video, I'm turning the firewall off. Certainly that is the ProxMOX firewall. If you have that ticked, you certainly can create rules to access the NGINX Proxy Manager. I'll have it off because this video is simply talking about NGINX Proxy Manager and how to install it. We can leave that DNS alone because that's going to come from ProxMOX itself. So at this point, it's now starting to create the Debian container. And depending on how fast your hardware is. That could be very quick, or like me, it's a bit slower, but eventually it does get there. And there it is, mine is now created. So if I close that, there's my container there called reverse. I'll click start now to start my container, and as you can see, it's now ready to log on. So I'm going to log on with my username and password. Okay, so the first thing you have to do is you have to enable your Debian repositories. This is important because you have to update your Debian, but also the installation script for Nginx Proxy Manager will be using apt quite a bit to install products that it needs. The first things first, you want to update your repositories. Then you want to upgrade any old packages in Debian. So I'll do that now. This will go off and do some installation, and that will take a little bit of time. So we'll just let that sit there as it happens. So while that's doing that, I should talk about the reason why I like ProxMOX. And that is, ProxMOX, if you're just mucking around, you're a small business or a very tiny business, ProxMOX provides their software free of charge. You can get a support pack. I recommend you get a support pack because A, you're supporting the people developing ProxMOX, and B, if there's troubles, you've got just that additional level of support. ProxMOX isn't that expensive to purchase compared to Microsoft Windows, and of course when you purchase Microsoft Windows you don't get any support. You still have to pay Microsoft if you want support, so it's interesting in that respect. But what I like about it are a couple of things. The first thing is I can back up this this container. I can back it up. I can back it up nightly, 2 or 3 times a day, once a month, and then I can restore it if things go wrong. And I can take snapshots, so I might want to take a snapshot before I do a security update of the packages in Debian. Finally, probably the most powerful thing is replication. So I can create a replication here where I say replicate this installation, say every 15 minutes or even less, it's up to you, and I'll replicate from here to another node on my ProxMOX. I can then also set high availability so that if the node that this is on currently happens to shut down or fail, this other node, and you can actually put as many nodes in there as you like. I can actually make it also go to my other node I have there. So one of those two will then take over and continue on that service. So I think that's fantastic. And cheap hardware. The hardware I purchased cost me about $600 all up. You can barely buy a brand new server for that price. Now, let's go back to the ProxMOX, the reverse install. So my Debian is now up to date. Yep, there we go, we're pretty happy. So the next step is we've got to make sure we have wget, because that is what we need to then get this script. So, oh look, there's a copy button there, we'll copy that. So the next thing to do is to run that script. And as you can see, it's now running apt to get some more packages. So it will do that. It's actually fascinating how high level web development has become. Older people like me who've been around since before the web and hacked around when the first version of HTML came out, we're definitely in awe of what's available today. You've got tons of options for web browsers, you've got tons of options for web servers, lightweight servers now like NGINX coming out. You've got huge web development frameworks, and even the installation of all of that is much easier. I mean, this script is amazing that's running now, and just installing Python and various components to get the web server up and running. And then of course once Python's installed, it starts to get various libraries that are required, and it does that using pip, the pip tool, which again is amazing to think that you can now publish libraries and have them collected by Python for your own web server. Back in the day you had to copy the files over and then link them in manually, configure the config files for your web server. It would take hours, and you can see this is all happening very quickly. And then you can see other components that are being installed, JavaScript libraries, and again you'd have to manually copy those things through, and we're not having to do that. It's just amazing what's available these days in the technology. To give it an idea, reverse proxies have existed for a long time. Apache can be configured as a reverse proxy, although it's cumbersome. Microsoft in the past have dabbled with reverse proxies, but again it would take you forever to install it, and then you'd have to configure all the rules. It's just amazing how lightweight and how quickly and how powerful this solution is. The other thing that's good about Nginx Proxy Manager is it has built-in support for Let's Encrypt, so you can also configure your SSL certificates on the fly as you're creating the rules to then get, to basically access your web servers. So completely publicly facing, completely automated, and such a powerful high-level product. Definitely a good time to be in the world of web development and creating servers. So we're getting there. We got 2 of 4 fetching packages. 2 of 4. So 2 more steps to go. I think overall this takes about 5 or 6 minutes to install. So what I might do is I'll pause the video at this point and I'll come back to you when my installation is finished. Okay, and so now we're almost at the end of the install here, and as you can see it's telling me that I can access the Nginx Proxy Manager on the following IP address. Of course, I've created my host name that resolves to that IP address, put that of course in my router, and so consequently I am presented with the logon screen. Now, as you can see here, we are given a email address and password. The default username to log on with is admin@example.com, and the password is change me. So I'll push that. Of course, the very first thing it wants me to do now is change my username and change my password. So I'm going to make my username that. You can pick whatever you like for your username, and then from there you just got to set your preferred admin password. And once you're in, you're in. Okay, so a few things. Here is our dashboard. Nothing to show you there at the moment. You've got some different styles of hosts. Access lists, I won't talk about them just yet. SSL certificates, which you can create as part of the proxy host process, and that's probably what I'll do. You can create multiple users in here to access things and assign them various roles, and then you've got settings. Now the default site, so if there's no rules in the system and you have a public DNS server out there and a registered DNS name, and that's all pointing to your local Nginx Proxy Manager server, if there's no rule, it'll give you this default site. You've got some options here. You've got the congratulations page, or you can just set a 404 with not found, which is very common on the internet. You can make it redirect to perhaps a working page of yours, or finally you can just put some direct HTML content in there that creates a custom page. At the moment I'll leave it with the default congratulations page. This is what you'll see. So I'm going to run through an anonymous proxy. The reason for that is when I put my host name in here, it's not going to use any of my local DNS or routers host name resolving techniques to basically take me internally to my web server. Instead, it's going to be as if I was sitting on the internet on the outside trying to access my internal servers. So this is one of my domains. This is my family's domain name. If I click it right now, I get this error, which is fine. So that is suggesting that nothing is working at the moment. Now I'm getting a 404 not found, so that's when I'm sort of experimenting here. So our congratulations page, which is definitely set there, should actually be doing something. Very surprising. So I also have another domain name registered, which also is pointing to my Nginx Proxy Manager. So I'll click that and see, yeah, that's what we should be seeing. Congratulations, which is a congratulations page. So it's quite possible that this kproxy website caches requests, which might explain why sometimes you get different messages, because that's usually the message kproxy gives you when the site doesn't exist at all. But we know that the site exists. So anyway, the important thing is it's not doing anything at the moment because we don't have a rule. So this is where the power of Nginx Proxy Manager comes in. So let's create a proxied host. So for that, as you can see, my first domain is this, and I want it to talk internally to my web server, which is this. Now remember, once it comes into your web server, or Nginx comes in, it's resolving on your internal DNS server. It's not using the external DNS server. So your internal DNS server would actually create this, but point it to your actual internal web server. And that way, if you've got a web server that's got multiple virtual hosts, you would just list these names here. Those names would be passed to your internal DNS server, and it could then use the rules on its virtual hosts to figure out which virtual host to apply. So that's the importance of that. So just to explain the process again, a client on the internet requests this domain. Your external DNS server will be pointing that domain to your IP address, your public IP address. That will be port forwarding to your Nginx Proxy Manager box. Your Nginx Proxy Manager box will have a rule that says if a request comes in for this, forward it to this. Your Nginx Proxy Manager box will then look up your internal DNS server, where you'll have an entry to your internal DNS server's IP address, web server's IP address, and then from there your internal web server will have possibly has multiple virtual hosts, of which case it sees this request and then knows which virtual host to provide. Sounds complicated. It is, but the flow, if you imagine the flow, it gets there in the end. That's the important thing. Okay, the next step before we go any further is we have to define an SSL certificate. We don't have one yet, so let's request a new one using Let's Encrypt. So we're going to agree this is my email address that I'll get my email back on. That's fine. We won't do anything fancy here at this point in time, but just note that because your Nginx Proxy Manager box is actually a web server in its own right, it is able to now generate a Let's Encrypt request, send it off, and then handle the challenge response from Let's Encrypt to then issue a certificate. So that's pretty high level. So we'll click Save here, and off it goes. So a couple of things to note here. You'll see this is generating that I put in port 80, which is the unencrypted web port, and then I've gone here and created an SSL certificate. By doing this, it seems to automatically then support 443 requests through this as well. So, does this work? Let's find out. We'll go here, and I'll click Surf. I'll put an HTTPS on it. There's my website. I'm pretty sure that this website, this anonymous proxy here, pretty sure that it is caching some of the requests, so I'm not sure how to fix that, except to say proxy.com. Maybe start the whole process again. Yeah, there we go, it was caching. So as you can see, used a different one of its resources, and there's my unencrypted version of my website. Okay, so I also have my other website, which is a website that I used to use because I used to develop my own software and share it, my own freeware type software. So at the moment, because there's no rule, it's taken me to the congratulations page. So if I go back here, I'll go to my host, proxy host, add a new proxy host. I'm going to put in my website here, and of course up here I'm going to go to SSL. I'm going to ask for a new certificate, and that's important. Your certificates always have to line up with your host name. Otherwise, in this day and age, your web browsers out there, they just reject everything. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so I'm going to click Save. Now that's not allowing me to save for some reason, so let's just check. Oh yes, you've got to make sure that you put your forward port in there. Okay, so that's now generating an SSL certificate with Let's Encrypt that will be used for, and there it is there. Perfect. So we've now got two Let's Encrypt. So if I go back to here, re-enter this, let's see, oh, it's still got there's that caching issue again. So if I go back to here, I'm pretty sure I've got to get rid of that out of there for it to work. Okay. Let's see if my encrypted version will work. Interesting, isn't it? So I'll go back and check that I got the... no, I've got this wrong. So this actually needs to be www, because it depends on how you handle your DNS, both internally and externally. So I only have entries internally and externally for the fully qualified domain name. So I've got to make sure that that is what's listed there. So that's what I've done. So let's see if we get an improvement now. much better. That is my website with software I've written over the years, so you can actually now see the power of this product here. So this video was all about just covering the basics of getting this up and running and creating some rules for it. There certainly are tons of videos out there on the internet that can go into the other options with more detail, so I'll leave that to other YouTubers out there. But I hope you enjoyed the video. I do enjoy making videos like this. Particularly fond of ProxMOX at the moment and what it can offer, and particularly for those, as I said, the small businesses that are struggling out there, particularly in the current climate with this this virus going around the world and the war that we have going on between Russia and Ukraine. And so certainly anything we can do to help business, those poor businesses, those mum and dad businesses keep going on the internet, I certainly am in support of that. So I hope this video has helped in some way. Take care now.